Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Raw podcast. Phil here, and as ever, I'm joined by my colleagues Jason Jones and James Copley. I'm not going to ask you how you are, boys, because I know exactly how you are. You're feeling very, very good, basking in the glow of 3 sweet Premier League points. And it had actually been a while since we'd managed to enjoy that. You kind of forget with Sunderland doing pretty well during the African Nations that it had been about a month since Sunderland had actually won in the league. But I thought, James, in the end, at the end of the 90 minutes, it thoroughly deserved 3 points.
Yeah, really good. Really encouraging performance again to come from behind, as they've done so many times this season. Shows great character. Sunderland still haven't lost back-to-back games in the Premier League this season, and they have followed every defeat this season in the league up with a win, which is mightily impressive. What is that, 33 points now? I know we've alluded to it and said it on this podcast before, but I genuinely think that Sunderland safe now. The gap between the bottom three and the rest of the league is quite sizable. I know the mid-table is tight, so you're looking at sort of anywhere from 16th up to 6th at the moment, potentially where Sunderland can finish. But I do think for the first time in a generation, really, in the Premier League, Sunderland could potentially, heading into the second half of the season, be looking upwards for a top 10 finish, which is hugely exciting. Hasn't been done since Steve Bruce. And this team continues to show bags and bags of bottle, which I really like. We've got the AFCON players coming back, the transfer window still open. So there's a lot to be positive about, and I'm really looking forward to the second half of the season.
Jace, it was an interesting game in the sense that it was quite nice to see Sunderland play like, the home team, trying to get after the game from minute one. It probably didn't fully work until the second half, if that makes sense. The first half, I was quite pleased with a lot of what I was seeing, especially like the intent from Sunderland. But you always felt like Crystal Palace could score until the second half. And I know Crystal Palace have got their own stuff going on, which we'll get to. But I thought the second half, Sunderland controlled it completely. I thought they were excellent.
Yeah, I'd fully agree. I think in terms of possession, territory, all those things that have sometimes been lacking under Regis Lebris, despite Sunderland having so many positive results, I thought Sunderland showed it in abundance. Really, both those things. Like you say, though, especially in the first half, Palace were always a threat. Whether it was I don't think Dan Bollard will have as many sort of bruising encounters as he had against Jean-Philippe Mateta at the weekend. There aren't many strikers who are going to give him that sort of headache so consistently. And like you said, were it not for fantastic save from Robin Roofs early on and maybe some sort of squandered opportunities from Palace, then Sunderland, despite the sort of ostensible dominance that was shown, could have found themselves in a sort of really tricky position. But like you say, I think by and large, it was a thoroughly deserved win, and it is positive to see Sunderland sort of exercise a little bit of control over sides coming to the Stadium of Light, and also to play with the sort of tactical fluidity that they did. I know when the team sheet dropped, and I'm sure we'll speak about it, we were sort of looking at it and go, well, is that another 5 at the back at home? Is that going to be one that, maybe comes back to bite them? A little bit of conservatism against a side who you feel they can go and get at. But then obviously the way that the Sunderland side are playing, the way that Lebris sets them up now, it was never really the case, was it? So all in all, really positive performance.
I don't know about you, Jace, but I'm coming away from the game having dreams of a Mateta and Broby strike combination, big man and big man. To be fair, I thought Ballard was brilliant in the second half, but as you say, Mateta was a menace in the first half. And they're two throwback centre forwards, aren't they? Their strength, even their speed, but also their first time shooting is just, that goal where Mateta was flagged offside, that would have been an absolute screamer. I really enjoyed watching them both. An exhibition of old-fashioned number 9 play.
Yeah, and you can completely understand why Palace are so worried about losing him as well. Obviously, everything else that's going on, I'm sure we will speak about that as the episode goes on. But, he is so important to what they do. But by that same metric, I think on Saturday, it was perhaps one of the best illustrations we've had yet of exactly what Brian Brobby brings to the Sunderland side. I know he's been impressive for weeks. I know he's done some really good work and scored some really crucial goals, over the past couple of months or so. But in terms of the amount of work he got through, the physicality that he continues to sort of exhibit, and just, even when he's not involved, he's a nuisance, isn't he? That the role he had in the goal, the equaliser, doesn't touch the ball once, but he just gives the central defender something to think about. It's a little run, it's a little dummy, it falls to Enzo Lafayette, and he equalises. And I was immensely impressed with Brian Brobby at the weekend. And I think the best thing to say about him is that it is almost becoming a weekly occurrence at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing, James, feels a little bit like we're seeing a kind of Sunderland 2.0 this season at the moment in terms of the first half of the season. It was defensive solidity, set piece threat. Obviously, those things are still there, but I think a combination of Jason mentioning there what Broby's been bringing to the team as the number 9, but I think also Enzo as a number 10. I think we're beginning to see that this team has a bit of a different look to what it had probably even 2 months ago. I'm thinking from the start of the Bournemouth game, obviously it's been up and down, but I feel like we're seeing a team that is a bit more front-footed and is able at times, obviously they're far from perfect, we wouldn't expect them to be, but at times able to control Premier League games with the ball, which I'm not sure we could have said 4 or 5 months ago.
No, it's taken a little bit of time to develop, and I think you're right to point out Enzo Lefebvre because he was playing on the left at the beginning of the season, wasn't he? And did an admirable job out there. But him coming into the middle, it's what we've all wanted to see almost since he arrived at the club. We did sort of question whether he would be able to do it in the Premier League. I think we can emphatically answer that as yes now. I think in all competitions, he's got 8 goal contributions. He's a joy to watch at times. He's been given a fantastic platform by Xhaka and Siddiqui, who are just consistently excellent. So to have him in behind Broby, I think really does help. And Broby just adds such a physical focal point, isn't he? He's such a handful. He's just an annoyance to defenders, but he can finish, and he gets absolutely nothing from the referees either. He gets thrown around all over the place. But I quite enjoy watching that contrast of the 9 and the 10 obviously being completely different players, but both offer something really quite nice. And that's what I alluded to in my initial point as well, is that it's so exciting to be a Sunderland fan at the moment because you get a sense that this team is growing tactically as they get more experienced. New threats are developing all over the pitch, but it's been built on sort of resilience and a real solid platform in midfield. And I think when they can get that sort of attack and fluidity right heading into the second half of the season, it is nice to think about that and what potentially it could bring, and the different moments and the upcoming games. It's nice, and of course the transfer window's still open, so there's an opportunity there. AFCON lads to come back in, but we've spoke a lot, haven't we, about like Granit Xhaka maybe being one of the best we've seen in Sunderland's midfield, and Noni Mukwele being one of the best defenders we've seen, but Enzo Lefebvre, like in terms of a technical footballer, he is just absolutely sensational. And I think we could probably say, in terms of his abilities, he's close to being one of the most mesmeric footballers we've seen at the club. He's so good.
He's like if Steve could play 90 minutes. It's the biggest compliment I could give basically any player. Jace, I mean, James mentioned Broby there. It's funny when you watch the games with the fouls. I have to say there was a lot on Saturday where at the time I'm watching it thinking, how's he not got a foul there? And then you watch the replays back and it is just 2 blokes brawling, basically giving it absolutely as good as they possibly can. I think it was just quite good to watch, wasn't it? I think I want to kind of give a shout out to Lacroix, really, because that was just, I really enjoyed just watching those two just absolutely not give an inch, going after each other all game.
Yeah, I mean, at one point he quite literally ripped the shirt off his back, didn't he? That sort of missed it at the time. It's only when we watched it back, he's had to go and get a replacement. I mean, for me, Brian Broby, it's almost like a blessing and a curse, isn't it? That strength, because on the one hand, nobody can outmuscle him. It's becoming apparent that he's just a unique problem in this league. But at the same time, he is so strong. It's almost as if the referee just doesn't seem to comprehend that somebody could possibly be fouling him. It's. I mean, the one thing I would say about him as well, I mentioned the fact he, quite literally ripped the shirt off the defender's back, but he's always got a handful of the defender's shirt as well. And I think that what we're seeing, there are a lot of moments where I think Brian Broby could be staying on his feet. I think he's making conscious decisions to hit the deck when he does. But just in terms of an outball, that's the most important thing, isn't it? What he brings to this side. Fire a ball into him. He's got a touch like Velcro. He's able to sort of back into his man. And then it allows the likes of Lefebvre, obviously Talby will be coming back from AFCON, whoever it may be, sort of buzzing in and around him. It just gives you an opportunity to get up the pitch and sort of bring those more sort of, traditionally technically gifted players into the game. But he is just, in terms of when you think about the transfer fee, you think about his contribution already, and then also the potential he's shown, because I still don't think we're seeing the best out of him. That's not a criticism. It's just a comment on how good I think he can become. it could prove to be a really, really shrewd signing from Sunderland.
Can I just say as well, the celebration after the goal was one of the most funny things I've ever seen at the stadium. I must have watched that video that the club have put out about 90 times alone. Absolutely sensational.
It's funny with Bro because he does have a lot of almost like Thursday night five-a-side moments in games. Like there was that one in the first half, the one he put his left foot through and got nowhere near, and then getting cramped after the goal. And yet he is, James, absolute top Premier League quality. Like there's no getting past that, is there? I mean, he's already on track this season. If he'd played a full season, he'd be on track for about 10 goals, which for a newly promoted Premier League side is like no mean feat whatsoever. And as Jace mentions there, actually he's just getting better and better. And if you look at the last few games, goal against Spurs, wins a penalty against Brentford, that could have got us something from the game, a goal again here. He's hitting a really genuinely impressive run of form, isn't he? And we spoke so much about strikers, and we've potentially got a guy who can do a little bit of both in terms of his all-round play, but also his goals.
Yeah, it's the hardest part of the game to get right. It's the hardest part of the game to coach. If you think about his introduction to life at Sunderland as well, he was sort of behind Mayenda and Isidore initially. He wasn't playing a lot of games, and then he was heavily rotated in and out. Then he was being replaced by Isidore. Then he was starting one game, then coming off as sub and another. So very hard to adapt to life in a new country, in a new city, to get that rhythm. Lebris likes to talk about connection with teammates as well. So I think now we're seeing the fruits of his labour, really, and Sunderland's labour. He's obviously worked extremely hard. He does work tirelessly up front. And that is nice to see, because although he does have quality in abundance, I think Sunderland being the club it is in the history of the area, we do like to see somebody that puts it about a bit, and he definitely does that. And I find it really, really nice to watch. And I think what I like about him most, Jace is sort of alluded to it as well, but just thinking of the goal away at Chelsea where he makes the right decision, he sort of gets played through on goal, but the ball sort of stalls, and instead of trying to nick it round the defender or go for a shot himself, which a lot of strikers would be selfish and do, he pauses and he waits for assistance, and Talby comes, and he does that in games. And I think that's a real underrated quality of a striker, is that hold-up play. But you want your striker to be selfish, but you also want him to make the right decision when there's a better option on, if that makes sense. And I think he does that regularly. I think he's a very intelligent footballer, and I think we're going to see that grow.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. You want your striker to be quite selfish, but not totally selfish. And I think Brian has a decent blend. Just before we move on a little bit and look at some various other bits and bobs, the last thing I want to kind of reflect on a little bit, because when the team news initially dropped, felt probably a little bit negative with Hume probably instead of a Mayenda on the right maybe. But I think it didn't feel like a negative selection when the game started, because to me it was a 4-4-2. I didn't think it was a back five really in any meaningful way. And like, I thought Hume had a really good game again. There's always that thing when he gets on the ball in the box and you kind of think, oh, this is maybe where it would be nice to have a winger, for that little bit of end product. But actually, I thought his contribution over the course of 90 minutes was really good. I mean, we talked a lot about Trey and what he's achieved already in his career and his development, but for him to play as a Premier League winger and do a good job, I think just speaks absolute volumes about who he is as a player.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. I think he's sort of one of those players that we're going to have to retrain ourselves, recalibrate our thinking on him, because he is a fullback. He's been a fullback since he joined the club, but it's becoming increasingly apparent that Regis Lebris doesn't just see him as a fullback anymore. Obviously played on the right wing predominantly at the weekend, but we've also seen him tuck into that midfield role on occasion, haven't we? And I think what's really important about Trey Hume at the moment is the versatility he brings is sort of affording Sunderland the opportunity to play with the fluidity that Lebris is so obviously trying to achieve here. And so, it sort of raises an interesting question, and one that you sort of mentioned at the weekend, Phil, where, we've spoken so much about recruitment and this idea of Sunderland definitely needing a right winger at some point. But, does Lebris see it that way? Because, he's quite happy to play Trey Hume in that position. It's obviously working for him. It helps him to achieve what he's, striving for tactically. And so in that sense, is it as much of a pressing urgency as a lot of us feel on the outside? I do agree with you. I think that, I've almost lost count now how many goals he could have had this season. It will come, and when it does come, it's going to be a wonderful moment for him. But, there have been quite a few moments now where you just wonder if someone with a more sort of natural attacking outlook would have buried an opportunity or two. But I also don't think that, that should be necessarily taken to his detriment. I think that in terms of what he is achieving, you're almost willing to overlook those slight shortfalls in the final third, because everything else that he brings to the Sunderland side is just exemplary at the moment.
And the other thing about this, James, is as well, is initially I thought it was quite a big chance missed, but that one at the end, it's actually a belter of a save from Henderson. I don't think Hume's done a great deal wrong with that one that he's pushed over the bar.
No, and I think Jace is absolutely spot on. His attack and output doesn't catch the eye as much as other players in Sunderland's squad. But what gets him in the team, and rightly so, is that he understands the role tactically. And I think Lebris really rates that. He's exemplary stepping into midfield. He can play a pass. He has the tactical discipline, his positioning, his movement is all spot on. And I think those are the sort of unseen, less flashier bits to Trey Hume's game that if you took out, you would actually notice. And I think sometimes, a little bit of safety first can go a long way. We don't want to be too cautious, but it's still 4-4-2 in possession. It's still fairly attacking. I know Hume's more of a right back than a right midfielder, but I didn't really have any issue with the selection just because it's still in attack, quite an expressive formation. And I think we saw that in the second half, didn't we, where Sunderland were fairly dominant in terms of momentum. I don't really remember Crystal Palace having that many spells once Sunderland were able to get to the grips with the game. I think he's an outstanding individual to have in the squad because he offers Lebris the opportunity to have different shapes and different matches and play two formations in one match, and then maybe switch it up for different opposition away from home if they're part of the traditional Big Six or something like that. I think far from sort of criticising what Trey Hume can't do, we need to look at what he can do, and I think he provides a lot to this Sunderland team as well. And you consider he played for us in League One as well. It's an outstanding story, it really is, and he's there on merit as well, not sentiment.
I think it probably tells us something as well. We chat a lot about strongest teams and what is the strongest 11, and it doesn't really matter, does it? It's about who's available, and if you're Hume and you're available every single week and can play 4 or 5 different positions at a very high level, strongest 11, it's not even really a thing, is it?
No, I completely agree. He's been good, and his mentality as well. We've spoken to him a lot over the years, and he's so grounded and so focused on the team. He doesn't give like superstar vibes either, does he? He's not a big head. He's not ahead of himself. He's very much concentrated on football. And I think from what we know about Lebris, I think Lebris will quite like that and see a kindred spirit, I think.
Yeah, we sat in on one of the more remarkable press conferences I think we've ever seen, Jace, from Oliver Glasner after the game. Scorched earth, I think I would probably describe it as. And obviously, people aren't listening to this for their Crystal Palace analysis, but I just thought I wanted to chat a little bit about it, Jay, because I think it is interesting from like a Sunderland perspective in terms of Crystal Palace really being one of those teams that, Sunderland ultimately are looking to emulate, right? It's really solid in the Premier League, won the FA Cup, fantastic couple of years playing in Europe. Just goes to show how hard it is and how exhausting it is, because the way the game is set up at the moment, you develop players and in the end you kind of suffer for it. I just thought it was kind of an interesting sort of look at the balance that Sunderland are going to have to strike over the next few years as teams inevitably start to look at Siddiqui and start to look at Ruffs and start to look at all these players.
Yeah, I think that's a really salient point. I mean, first and foremost, what a press conference. It's interesting. You see a scorched earth, and yet they've decided that he's going nowhere. It's like you almost wonder if he's...
Such an alpha move, that, by the way, isn't it? To be so good at your job that you can behave like that and slag your boss off like that in public and get away with it. I have to rip from...
What was his quote? He was like, "I'm not going anywhere because the players deserve Oliver Glasner." Yeah, I was like, back of the room, like, bloody hell, fair enough, man.
I'm not leaving the Raw podcast because the Raw podcast deserves Phil Smith. Yeah, it doesn't sound right, does it? But fair play, you pulled it off.
Those words are weird coming out of your mouth, Phil, because you're the least egotistical person I think I've ever met in the world.
Yeah, it just doesn't work, and I respect that he's managed to pull that off.
I was quick aside, but I was on work experience at Manchester United the week that Mourinho did his football heritage press conference, and he had that 12-minute rant and everything. And I sat in on that one, and obviously I was just complete absolute novice. And my jaw was on the floor during that. And I was kind of thinking, like, I'm probably never going to see a press conference quite that explosive again. And then you come into the press room at the stadium, like the final whistle on Saturday, and you see Glasner just both barrels at Steve Parish, and you're thinking, this is a man who, like, he's beyond the end of his tether, isn't he? You know, his tether was about 6 months ago, evidently. But I think you're absolutely right. From a Sunderland perspective, maybe does serve as maybe a little bit of a warning, maybe a little bit of a reminder that the sort of the level you've got to operate and the way that you've got to be able to maintain it. You know, it's really tricky to take that next step, especially because when you look at a club like Palace, you think, well, what is the ceiling for a club like Palace? You know, that they're never going to say this with pinches, they're never going to win a title, are they? You know, so you think, right, well, the sort of pinnacle of where they're at is probably going to be an FA Cup and a European run, and they've achieved those things. But then once you get there and the clubs, you know, the big clubs, quote unquote, start to circle and they start picking at the bones and that, and you think, well, where do you go next? I think the only thing you would say from a Sunderland point of view is that you'd have to have faith in the recruitment team and the work they've done so far. And I think that what we've seen over the past couple of years or so, maybe a little bit longer, is that there's been a plan in place for every eventuality. And at every point that we've all been going, you know, panic stations or this is a concern, they've very much had a sort of contingency in place to ensure that that's not something that needs to be worried about. And so you would hope that as this Sunderland team progresses, you would hope the Sunderland team does progress, but as it goes on, you would hope that that will continue to be the case, because I do think you're right. You know, you could go through the side at the moment, couldn't you? Roofs, Siddiqui, even someone like, you know, Mukiele. Like, there'll be clubs looking at him thinking, you know, how have we missed him, and does he have another couple of years in him, and all these sort of things, you know. So it's about Sunderland being able to strike the balance between, you know, harnessing those players and their qualities now, knowing when to sell, which is something they've been really good at in recent years when you think about the likes of Jack Clark, Ross Stewart, all of that sort of stuff, and then being able to reinvest as well. And I guess the reinvestment is kind of the side that we're still getting used to, because we've only really getting used to this idea of someone having a little bit of money to spend. You look at Joe Bellingham goes, you bring in Habib Diarra. We're still not entirely sure how well that'll work because he's barely played, really, no fault of his own. But I guess that's going to be the next interesting thing, isn't it? How Sunderland use that money to sort of hopefully take those next steps.
To that as well, and add with Crystal Palace, this is something Sunderland tend to do fairly well, but contract management. I mean, the Mark Guay situation, they could have sold him for a lot of money in the summer. They're now going to struggle to maybe get a replacement through the door because he's gone to Manchester City. And I think it speaks as well, it's very difficult for any team in the world to consistently lose the best players in short succession. Eze, Gay, apparently Mateta now on the way as well. It's so tough, and I have a lot of sympathies with Crystal Palace fans at the moment, because you've had your best season in living memory, and then it's all sort of gone down the toilet just at a time when you thought there was the possibility to build something special. And there's probably a separate debate to be had about, you know, the hierarchy of football and whether the current system or the new system that's going to come in allows for enough sort of social mobility, for want of a better word. Probably not.
Yeah, I think the kind of point I was starting out with here, Jace, is that it shows why you have to sell, because players only sign the 5-6 year contracts that allow you to make big profits if they know that you will sell them. And if you don't sell them, they'll run the contracts down and they then take all the power. And that's what's happened with Crystal Palace, right? They're struggling to get replacements in because they haven't got control of when they're selling players. So I guess that was the point I was kind of reflecting on, that we talk a lot about, you know, ambition and wanting someone to be ambitious. But actually, when you are not one of this kind of elite right now, you have to sell. Otherwise, you know, it's not just a financial thing. The whole thing doesn't work otherwise.
Yeah, but again, it's kind of finding the time that's right for the club and the player, and that's something that Sunderland have been really good at. It's about knowing when to pull the trigger on the sale. So you're absolutely right. Like, you know, you think about someone like Joe Bellingham is maybe the best example, you know, in terms of bringing him in, and how do you lure a player of that obvious potential to a club like Sunderland? You say, well, okay, this can be the next step in your personal development, and then when the time is right for you to move on, we won't stand in your way. At the same time, you can't allow yourself to be bullied into selling players willy-nilly, because, you know, you do have your own ambitions. And so I think one thing that Sunderland have to be sort of commended for in recent seasons is the fact that they have, by and large, you know, sort of cashed in at the right time. And I think we've seen it a few times. Like I said, Clark, Stewart, Bellingham is proving to be that at the moment. I think it's fair to say, sort of similar case study. So yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And like I said, just to echo what James was saying, you've got a feel for Crystal Palace fans right now.
And again, to add to that, Sunderland have done a reasonable job over the years say when Jack Clark went, Romain Mundle was already in the door, ready to go. When Joe Bellingham was sold, that triggered another level of deal for Sunderland. They had already scouted Noah Siddiqui and Habib Diarra quite rigorously, and they were well up their list on the names of targets. Obviously, the Xhaka deal came through as well. And the new signing, how do we say it? Is it Jocelyn Talbar? Is it
Talby? I think
Talby. Okay, that's gonna be tricky with a Chemsdine kicking around as well. But hopefully, him coming in, he's sort of going to be maybe second or third fiddle for a little while. It's going to take him a little way to grow into the Sunderland team. But maybe when you do sell a big attacking player, he's ready-made there, waiting to come in.
How much of the Israeli Premier League have you seen, James? What can you tell us about Jocelyn Tarby?
I would love to say that I've seen loads of it, but I haven't. I haven't even seen a YouTube compilation yet because it's been that busy. But I gather from what I've read, little bits and pieces, that he's an attacking winger. So that's all I've got for you.
There we go. Exclusive.
I don't even know what foot he is, to be honest. Is he left or right?
He's left-footed. Yeah, left-footed cuts in from the right. There you go. Our listeners are blessed today with our insight. But we were in the press conference with Fabrice Jason. He spoke about Tarby, and I was kind of braced for him to talk this down really, and just to say development signing. Now, obviously, he's not going to be in the starting 11 on Saturday, but Fabrice was probably a bit more effusive than I expected him to be in terms of saying we'll get him in and see how he does. He's got a lot of attributes that we like. I thought that was quite interesting from a head coach who I think normally would be quite quick to play things down when he gets the opportunity.
Yeah, you're right. I was sort of caught off guard a little bit like that by that as well, especially because when you look at the sort of Christian Speakman statement that came with his arrival, there was a real emphasis on patience, this idea of bedding him into the squad and sort of taking time with him. And I mean, look, that's probably still going to be the case. I think perhaps Fabrice is looking at it and going, well, we've got players younger than him who've come in and hit the ground running. Why couldn't he do the same? Obviously, there is a huge gulf in class between the English Premier League and the Israeli top flight. But in terms of his raw attributes, and this is speaking as someone who has watched the YouTube compilation, he looks exciting, doesn't he? He really does look exciting. He's a very gifted dribbler. Fabrice spoke about this idea of him being quite a rare prospect in the sense that he's able to get at people one-on-one. He's hard to dispossess, and you don't get many players of that profile in the modern game. So I think that was really interesting. Like I say, obviously the way that he cuts inside benefits Sunderland, the way that they like to play, seems to have a howitzer over a shot on him as well. So if all of those things come together, then there's every chance that he could go on to be a really decent player for Sunderland. I do think that even with the Fabrice being sort of unusually effusive, like you say, we do maybe need to temper it with a decent amount of patience and everything. But look, if he thinks that he's potentially ready to have a crack at the first team sooner rather than later, then surely that's only a positive thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and just for anyone who missed the quotes over the weekend, he has arrived with a little bit of an ankle knock, so I think it's a couple of weeks before he'd be fully fit anyway. But I mean this is a positive, James. This feels very bright and coded. Take a bit of a gamble in January, relatively low risk. There's no obvious need for them to go straight into the team. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. If it does, you're potentially looking at a good player and a huge profit. This is the kind of thing that I feel like someone should be doing. And, obviously I hope they do a bit more in January to kind of have a go of the season. But this feels like the kind of thing that every team, in the current financial climate with the rules in place should be looking to do.
Well, the fee is reported to be only 3.5 million, which when you split that and his wages over the length of his contract, which was a 4.5-year deal with the option for another year. I mean, that's a drop in the ocean for a Premier League club. So yeah, it's a very much like a football manager signing, isn't it? You rely on your scouting department to bring these people in. It's exciting because he's a relative unknown, as we've proven there. You want to see how he does, and the upside potential is huge if he starts playing well for Sunderland. All of a sudden, like Simon Adingra did last season, you can find yourself going for 24, 25, 26 million pounds, heading on to 30, and then beyond if you really turn it on. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how he does. And Sunderland seem to have very decent wingers to me at the moment. I think possibly need to improve our sort of goal scoring output a little bit, but I'm quite comfortable with Sunderland's options on the wing at the moment, with Diarra to come back from AFCON, Talby as well, It's opens up a lot of doors, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's relatively quiet on the transfer front at the moment, so I think it's something we'll pick up probably in a bit more depth next week as we head into the final week of the window. I just wanted to reflect, actually, you've kind of alluded to it there, James. I thought this would be a good point to have sort of 5-10 minutes at the end. West Ham on Saturday, we know it's the table would suggest it's a big opportunity, which it is, but it's obviously going to be tricky. West Ham have just beaten Spurs, but I'm interested because there was a point where we would have assumed that Diarra would come pretty much straight back into the 11. Now, obviously, we don't know when he's going to come back from AFCON. But at the moment, I don't really see a place for him in the 11 straight away. Do you, James?
No, not necessarily straight away, but I don't think that's sort of a slight on him. Sunderland are obviously playing really well. We've discussed Enzo Lefebvre's been absolutely fantastic. He's coming back in from injuries, coming back in having been away at AFCON. So you might have to bide his time a little bit. What I will say is exactly what you said earlier, Phil, in terms of looking at it through the lens of a starting 11. He's going to be number 12, number 13 coming off the bench. He's going to get minutes. He'll probably force his way into the team at some point. There will be suspensions. There'll be little injury knocks here and there. So he might have to be patient for a little while. I still see him playing a big part in Sunderland season if they can keep him fit. Obviously, there's a little bit of incentive to play him as well because he is the club's record signing, cost £30 million. So they'll want to maintain his value. But yeah, I think you'll have to wait a little bit. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. As well, and it speaks to sort of how well Sunderland have managed to navigate that AFCON period. We all sort of the noise was that Sunderland would tank really badly, and that just didn't happen in terms of losing a lot of games. It just didn't happen at all. And as well as it's a big plus, it's a big positive to have him back. He adds dynamism. He's a good ball carrier, so to have him as an option, we saw him come on the right-hand side, didn't we, towards the end of last month when he was coming back in. So I think it's exciting to have him in and around. And as I say, I think he'll be first or second off the bench with 30 minutes to play.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely no way he gets in ahead of Lefebvre right now, is there, Jason? That's not a knock on Diarra. It's just a reflection of the fact that, credit to Lefebvre, he's established himself as one of the first names on the team sheet at the moment, hasn't he, in that number 10 position?
Yeah, absolutely. He's borderline undroppable, isn't he? And then you start to look at it and you go, right, well, maybe Sunderland are, you would think they're lacking a little bit on the right-hand side, but then Trey Hume's impressing, this formation's working for them. Obviously, out on the left, Talby's coming back from AFCON as well. I think he is still probably Sunderland's best option in that area of the pitch, even though I think Mundell is improving at this level. And so, it isn't going to be straightforward for Diarra, but I also think, what a wonderful position to be in. You want options, you want depth, you want selection headaches. You want the opportunity to rotate both week to week and in game as well. And so, like James says, there's no doubt that he's going to get minutes. He's the club's record signer. I actually thought he looked really good prior to his injury at the beginning of the season. He's got qualities that would suggest that he's going to be a success in the Premier League in terms of him being able to break the lines, drive the team forward. He's a wonderful, powerful ball carrier. And so, you would assume that he will have a role to play. But because Lefebvre is doing so well, it's not sort of immediately clear where the opportunity will come. But, while that may be not necessarily frustrating, but, that'll be something that he'll be able to work on. It's a wonderful thing for Sunderland to have.
I think it's credit to Lefebvre as well, because I absolutely would not want to move him back to the wing now. He does a good job there, but I just think he would be slightly wasted.
If I turn up at West Ham and Lefebvre's on the wing, I'm on the pitch. I'm telling you that right now. There will be absolute hell on. What team would we be sending out on Saturday? I mean, I don't think there's a huge amount of debate, really. I think aside from what we were just saying about Diarra, we don't know when he'll be back on. We aside how much training he'll have. Talby hasn't had a lot of football during the Africa Cup of Nations, which is not absolutely ideal. Obviously, there's the debate. Do you bring Adingra back in, give him an opportunity? Personally, I'd be tempted to give Mundell another game, James, just to let him keep kind of building that bit of momentum. I thought he had a good second half the other day. What do you think? I'd be tempted just to go unchanged for this game.
Yeah, unchanged. I completely agree on Romain Mundell. I think he's hopefully going to build up a little bit of a head of steam now. It was his first Premier League start. I think his defensive work has been exceptional since he's been coming on for Sunderland in those games. I think, obviously, it's very hard to get an attacking rhythm, isn't it, when you're just coming on for the final 10, 20 minutes. So to see him start, I thought he was a bit more effective, and I think that'll build. I guess the interesting thing is that I wouldn't necessarily make any changes, but then that does sort of produce a few talking points. Like Gertruder is probably good enough to play, and you'd like him to get some minutes at some point. Obviously, didn't come off the bench at all at the weekend. Mayenda as well. I'm keen to see a little bit more of. Dennis Serkin didn't necessarily do anything wrong. He just had Ronaldo Mandava come back, who was excellent, by the way. It's just a sort of different level of fullback at the moment. So whilst I wouldn't change anything, I do actually feel for a few of the lads on the bench. I mean, Isidore as well, not coming on. It was Mayenda that was preferred for the final 6 minutes against Palace. So I think in a way that's good, though, because it does create internal competition, and I think it's good that there are those lads on the bench that could perhaps feel a little bit put out, but they'll be pushing really, really hard in training. Luke O'Nine's spoken about it. There's almost like a second group on who trains on a Sunday away from the lads that have featured on the Saturday, and it's a really intense group. They're really pushing each other. The training sessions are really good, really detailed. And I think that's a positive for that squad. I think they do sort of they do chisel each other, if that makes sense. They do push hard, and yeah, it's a shame for those players that are on the bench, particularly someone like Wilson Isidore, who's obviously 4 goals this season but hasn't scored for a while. But hopefully they'll be chomping at the bit to take their opportunity when it does eventually come. But again, good problem to have, because I don't think any one of that 11 against Palace suggested to me that they should be dropped unless there's a little injury issue which comes up. I mean, Broby's was only cramp, wasn't it? So you'd suspect he'd be okay a week later.
Come on, Jay, say something controversial. What shock change would you make if you were Regis Lebris at West Ham?
Patterson and goal, Jace, go on.
Patterson up front, mate. That's what I'm going with. No, I'm tempted to agree, because I think it's hard to justify anybody coming out of the 11, isn't it? I do think, Mundle's maybe the point at which you look and you go, right, does he make the change there? Because, and again, we spoke about this at the weekend, Phil, but, Simon Adingra, I know he didn't have a great game prior to coming out of the side, but actually he looked really good against Leeds. And maybe if you're going to get the best out of Adingra, you need to give him more of an opportunity to get into the side, to bed himself in, and to sort of build up the momentum that James was talking about with Romain Mundle there. So he's maybe one who I'll be looking at and thinking, do you give him an opportunity to get at a West Ham side who so far this season have looked pretty beleaguered at the back? But by that same metric, I know Mundle hasn't been, pulling up loads of trees in the final third, hasn't been like, peppering the goal with shots or anything like that. But his work rate is unquestionable, and I do think he is getting better at this level. And if we're going to get the best out of a player like him, someone who's made the step up from the Championship, who's come back from injury, he's still young, has all this potential, then he needs minutes to do so. And I think that once Talby is sort of back and in the rhythm of the squad, which you would probably assume won't be this weekend, then I think both Mundle and Adingra might struggle for minutes. So giving either one of them a run out against West Ham could be a really good opportunity for them. But if it was me, I would probably be tempted to stick with Romain Mundle out there.
Where do you stand, Phil, on the Mundle-Adingra debate? Because for me, what I've seen this season, I'm more comfortable with Mundle in there from a defensive standpoint.
Yeah, I would have picked Adingra on Saturday because I felt a bit for him having played really well against Leeds, and then he didn't maintain that. But I think when you look at the games that followed, there weren't games where Sunderland was seeing loads of the ball and games that I thought necessarily suited his best attributes. And my feeling was that Saturday, you could almost challenge him to back up what he did in the Leeds game and say, right, at home, we're going to have a lot of the ball. You're actually going to get the ball in the final third. Go and make something happen. So I would have picked Adingra. But I think that my main view on it is don't chop and change. Give them an actual opportunity to build some head of steam. And having struggled in the first half, I thought Mundle had a good second half. And what you say, James, is absolutely right. The thing with Mundle is you are getting a level of work rate and defensive application that almost makes him easy to pick. So I know it sounds bizarre, but if it makes sense, I would have picked Adingra on Saturday, but having picked Mundle, I would pick him again. Do you know what I mean? At West Ham, I think for those lads, I think consistency is really important.
And there's an argument, isn't there, as well, Phil, that it's actually, at the moment, we tend to look at stats, goals and assists, attacking output. But in terms of this season, it's actually quite hard to be a winger in the Premier League because everything's very central. There's a lot of emphasis on defence and set pieces. I really like it. I don't see this moral panic about the style of the game. Maybe it's because Sunderland are doing quite well, but I don't mind it at all. But I think that's maybe an undervalued point, that actually to have an impact from the wing, it's not always really easy.
Well, especially not in this team, right? Because like Sunderland just don't. It's not like our wingers are getting 6 shots from 20 yards or inside over the course of the game, is it? And that was why I just felt a little bit for Adingra, because I felt that Leeds game had shown what he can do when you have the ball, and I just thought maybe give him an opportunity in a game that suits him. But I think ultimately it's difficult to criticise the decision because Mundell had done well at Everton, and I do think consistency is really important. I mean, Jace, just finally, I think one thing that does show, I think it probably puts to bed any chat of Mundell potentially going out this month, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And we sort of heard that from the Briss as well post-match. There was that little cheeky comment where someone asked him about interest from other clubs, and he was like, well, good. You know, it's good to see other clubs looking at our players. It's good to know that they're doing something which is attracting other suitors. And I think he's absolutely right. At the end of the day, I wouldn't have felt particularly comfortable about Mundell leaving anyway. I think Sunderland do still need options in wide areas, especially when nobody is sort of, you know, taking their opportunity by the scruff of the neck and making themselves undroppable. And so I think he is a really good option to have. You know, I think that him being around this squad is probably just as positive for his development as going out and playing week in, week out, whether that be, you know, Championship, Scottish Premier League, Eredivisie, wherever it might be. So, yeah, you know, I'm content with the Romain Mundell situation. I think he's a player who has a lot of potential. And I think he's, again, talk about attributes, but there's nothing about Romain Mundell that suggests he can't go on to be a success in the Premier League. It's just about him finding his footing in an incredibly difficult division. And the early signs for me are that while his consistency isn't maybe quite at the level that he would want it to be, there are flashes that he is getting there. And I think that the more he can produce that and the more consistent he can be with that, then the more of an attribute he becomes, more of an asset, he becomes to Sunderland. And yeah, hopefully he gets plenty of opportunities to prove that over the remainder of the season.
I think as well, the thing we miss with a lot of Sunderland players, just because we've been conditioned and we're so used to it, like Chris Riggs still 18, Eliza Mayenda 20, Mundell's only 22, Chamsdine Talby was signed as a 19-year-old, only 20, Noah Siddiqui still incredibly to me only 20 years old. A lot of these players are so young, and we know between the ages of like 16 to 24, players' growth comes at a, you know, varying different rates. I think I agree with Jace. I think Mundell's just fine where he is.
Brian Broby's 23. I mean, I have to literally keep Googling that just to check it and remind yourself, because like when you put his career then into context, like he had a bad year last year, but as a 22-year-old, he's twice scored more than 10 goals for Ajax. Like it's, you know, it does just go to show how our perception has almost been changed, doesn't it, by Sunderland's recruitment model. And like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's a really salient point to end it, that a lot of these lads just need time.
Robin Roof's 23. Like, how mature does he look in goal? It's crazy.
Yeah, it is. And I think, yeah, because we've spoken a lot about this over the last couple of weeks, and some of these lads, they've got plenty of time. It's just, you know, we can just let them settle at this level, can't we? Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for your company, boys, as ever. Really enjoyed that chat. We'll definitely be back next week after the West Ham game. We might have something between now and then if anything dramatic happens in the transfer market. Maybe there'll be another player from James's favourite league that he can come and tell us all about. But thank you very much.
I don't know why I'm getting all this stick. You two didn't have no idea about him either.
No, that's fair enough. Yeah, I was going to defend myself, but that's absolutely fair. So we'll be back soon with more insight on the Israeli Premier League and everything else besides. Thank you very much for your company and your support of the podcast, whether you're listening or whether you're watching. Very grateful for your time and your company. So we'll see you again soon. And boys, thanks very much for the company as ever.